but we do have Y chromosome DNA for humans. By the way, there's a reason why we don't get it from the Neanderthals. With the Y chromosome DNA, that's nuclear DNA, and you only get 2 copies per cell. With a mitochondrial DNA, you get 500 to 1,000 copies per cell. So it's a lot easier to reconstruct ancient mitochondrial DNA than it is to construct ancient Y chromosome DNA. And you say, can we go to the other bipedal primates? Most geneticists believe that there's virtually a 0 chance that we'll ever recover intact DNA from any other bipedal primate species, simply because they're too ancient. We may be able to get it from Homo sapiens ideltu, and maybe the archaic Homo sapiens we see in Israel. Those are only about 100,000 years old. But as far as Homo erectus goes, that's 1.8 million to about 500,000 years ago. That's too much time. And that amount of time, the DNA will degrade to a point where you simply can't reconstruct it. But mitochondrial DNA, you can dig significantly deeper into the past than you can with Y chromosome. So that's the reason why we only have Y chromosome for humans. But when you look at our Y chromosome DNA, just like with a mitochondrial DNA, it demonstrates that there is no evolution going on in human Y chromosome. Humans that have been dead 30 to 40,000 years reveal a Y chromosome that's indistinguishable from the Y chromosomes of modern humans. And in the case of Y chromosome diversity, it's even less than what we see for the mitochondrial DNA. So that establishes by 2 independent lines that the human species has not evolved. Now, I mentioned here the great apes because they've been able to recover Y chromosomes from living gorillas, 2 different species, both the mountain gorillas and the valley gorillas, and orangutans and chimpanzees. And what they notice in those 4 species is that just like with humans, you see very little diversity. And yet we compare the Y chromosome of, say, mountain gorillas with orangutans or with chimpanzees or with humans, you see a huge difference. Now, the old story was that these great apes and humans had a common ancestor anywhere from 5 to 20 million years ago. But that no longer washes, because we can see that there's very little diversity in each of these species, and yet there's a huge difference when you go from species to species, which means that 20 million years would not be adequate time to explain the differences in the Y chromosomes between the species, among the species, given that there's so little diversity in each species. That low amount of diversity tells us that the rate of evolution is slow. By the way, this is something that fits perfectly our reasons to believe speciation model. We have this published in this book, The Genesis Question, where we talk about how about a dozen years ago now, we assembled a team of leading evolutionary biologists who are all Christians from Caltech, UCLA, UC Irvine, University of Southern California, UC Riverside, UC San Diego, literally California's best universities. And we had them come to our office every couple of months over the span of about 2.5 years. And our goal was to build a mathematical model to predict speciation from a naturalistic perspective. And the driving mechanisms of evolutionary change are natural selection and mutations. Well, we quickly figured out that natural selection isn't going to do a lot for you. Mutations are really the only way you're going to generate big changes. But the problem is that when you look at the genomes of different life forms, you notice that you get at least 10,000 deleterious mutations. These are mutations that are harmful for the survival of the species for every beneficial mutation. And sometimes the ratio gets as bad as 10 million to 1, but the best you see is 10,000 to 1. And then the reason why we had some physicists and mathematicians, and along with the evolutionary biologists, is to make the point that no one in biology has built a speciation model taking into account that the solar system significantly changes over time and the planet significantly changes. As I was talking this morning, our planet is now rotating 6 times more slowly than when God first created bacteria on the planet. The radioactive output from the core of the Earth is only 1/5 of what it was. And we have the sun 15% brighter today. And the problem or the challenge for every life form is to be able to pick up on the benefit of the beneficial mutations before that species is driven to extinction by either the deleterious mutations or by the changes in the physics of the Earth and the sun. And the bottom line is this: a species is guaranteed to go extinct before it can evolve into a different species unless its population exceeds 1 quadrillion, unless its body size is less than 1 centimeter, and unless its generation time is briefer than 3 months. That's the time between being born and being able to give birth. Well, if you look at the primates, none of them are anywhere close to those limits. None of the primates number more than a few billion in the population, and all of us have huge body sizes, much bigger than 1 centimeter across, and we all take significantly longer than 3 months to reproduce. And so this really beautifully explains why we're seeing no genetic evidence for evolution in orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas, human beings, and Neanderthals. For what it's worth, we believe that our mathematical model is much too conservative, because our model, if our numbers were right, would predict that we would witness the appearance of a brand new bacterial species about once every year. And we've had the capacity to pick up these additional bacterial species at least for the past 150 years. And over that 150 years, we have seen 0 bacterial species come into existence. So that tells us that we were too conservative in our numbers, which is not surprising because we didn't have very good data to work with. We were just doing the best we could. But let me move on. One of the things that the Bible definitively says, all right, here we go. Got to find my cursor. You see it. There it is. Okay. What does the Bible definitively say about human origins? I mean, it says a lot, but much of it is difficult to pin down specifically. But one of the things we can be certain about is it tells us that Adam and Eve were the last of God's creation miracles. When God created Eve, he went into a state of rest and still remains in that state of rest according to Hebrews 4. This is that day of creation when God does not create new species of life. And this is something that's well witnessed by the biological community. We see all kinds of extinctions, but we have yet to witness the appearance of even one animal species in the record of nature. But the fossil record tells us that there was abundant speciation going on, at an average of 1 new species appearing every year before the human race shows up on the scene. The other thing the Bible definitively tells us is that humans were the only spirit species that God created on earth. One of the points, this book is coming out in September, Who is Adam, our latest book on our 10-book series on our testable creation model. And one of the things we point out is that if you want to destroy the Christian faith, then just prove that the human species has no unique attributes. I would argue that Christianity is fundamentally built on the biblical doctrine that we humans are special in all the species of life that God created. We have 3 different kinds of animals, according to Genesis 1 and Psalm 104, that God creates. They're the purely physical creatures, like the bacteria, the viruses, and the insects. And then we have the soulish creatures, like the birds and mammals, and a couple of species of the higher reptiles. And then we have human beings. The soulish animals, Old Testament definition, are those creatures endowed by God with mind, will, and emotions to form relationships with human beings. But we alone are body, soul, and spirit. And it's our spirit component that enables us to discover God and form a relationship with God. So I particularly enjoy Job 39 in the sense that it tells us how God designed these creatures to have this powerful desire to relate to us. Well, likewise, we're created to have a powerful desire to relate to God. Sin gets in the way, of course, but nevertheless, there is that spirit component to us. So we're the only species, according to the Bible, that wonders about what's coming after we finish